SEP Fanfic Readings presents 5 Days by RavieSnake. Chapter 7. Day 3. Morning. The ground was still wet, but the rain had mercifully petered out over the course of the night. The slick walls of the crevice shone when the morning sun finally rose high enough to spill down and light up the space. 898, 899, 900. Draco counted out loud in a tired drone. He lightly headbutted Hermione's sleeping face. "Rise and shine, Granger." Hermione groaned in her sleep and rolled her head away from his. Draco rolled his eyes. "Get up," he said louder, turning his shoulder into her. "Time to kick those pretty legs." "Stop," she whined. "Still tired." "Yeah, you and me both," he said. "Now get up. I need to pee, and then I think we should start yelling." Hermione slowly lolled her head back around and scowled at him through sleep-heavy lids. "What?" "Legs first," he said, cocking an eyebrow at her reproachfully. Hermione groaned again and shook her head slightly as she blinked the sleep from her eyes. "I wish I worked out more before this," she grumbled as she struggled to pull each leg up as high as she could several times. She relaxed her screaming thigh muscles with a painful gasp. Draco merely stared at her. "Are you done?" he asked. She shook her head. "Hold on," she said as she tugged on her damp shorts. She relieved herself quickly and then went through the motions of allowing Draco to as well. When they finished, Hermione yawned and then looked at him expectantly. "Now, what's this about yelling?" she asked. Draco scanned his eyes around at the still moist walls. "We should try yelling for help again. The rain's gone, and the dirt is still damp, so it won't cloud up from our voices echoing." Hermione frowned at the idea. "No one is going to be out here just after those storms," she said. "Especially not this early in the morning." Draco furrowed his brow back at her. "How is it that you were sorted into Gryffindor?" he asked. "Weren't you lot all about being brave and never giving up or some shit?" "Not wanting to waste what precious little energy we have left to us by screaming to no one doesn't equate to a lack of will or bravery," she answered. "Simply logic." "Here's some logic. If someone heard us, we'd be rescued and our energy level wouldn't matter," he snapped back. Hermione sighed. "Scream like a banshee, then," she said. "Wake me up in 15. She laid her head back down and closed her eyes. Draco shook his shoulder, roughly jarring her. "No," he said firmly. "We slept most of the day yesterday. Today we need to figure out how to get the hell out of here." Hermione lifted her head with a heavy sigh. "Just what do you suggest? Screaming until we pass out and die?" Draco squinted his eyes. "We could alternate the yelling between attempts at freeing ourselves." "Do you have any practical ideas?" she asked in a defeated drawl. "Yes, actually," he answered seriously, causing Hermione's brow to raise in interest. "Like what?" she demanded. "We could try apparating." Hermione's forehead scrunched up at that suggestion. "We'd almost certainly splinch ourselves, and badly. In our state, I doubt we'd survive the reassembly. That's if we could even manage apparating at all. First, we'd have to do it wandlessly, which, even with rested cores, is difficult. And second, we have poor footing to focus our turns on. Do you honestly feel confident enough to try it?" Draco pouted disappointedly. "No, I suppose not. But I have another idea." "Like?" she prompted. Draco scanned his vision up and around the crevice as he answered. "The tandem casting. Instead of a warming charm, we could levitate ourselves." Hermione's shoulders slumped. "That won't work," she muttered. Draco looked back at her. "Yes, it could," he insisted. "It's an easy spell." "Malfoy," Hermione said in an exasperated tone, "we are much too heavy. Again, it'd be difficult to lift ourselves that height with wands and full strength. As it is, we'd maybe make it a few inches before we gave under the strain." "We could do it a few inches at a time," he tried to convince her. "We'd raise ourselves a bit, then stop and brace ourselves with our freed arms. Then move a bit more when our core's built back up. Or we could even try to climb." Hermione looked at him sadly. "It was a nice idea," she said. "You won't even try?" Draco asked angrily. Hermione twisted her lips as she considered him a moment. "What's with this new determination to get out? Last night you were resigned to the idea that we were doomed. Draco made an impatient face.
Well, maybe I've just decided I don't want to die in a hole anymore, Granger. At the very least, I need to know that we actually made an effort to try and live.
Hermione's eyes searched his, and she sighed again at the sincerity in them. Okay, she agreed, shrugging. Let's give it a go. Draco had opened his mouth, apparently in preparation to argue with her, but snapped it shut at her acquiescence. His eyes narrowed at her suspiciously.
You'll try it with me? He asked.
My hopes are not high for success, she said honestly, but you're right about trying. If it means a chance of surviving, we should do it.
Draco blinked at her for a moment, and then scrutinized the walls just above them. Yeah, this could work, he said, as if to convince himself. He looked her in the eyes again. This will work.
Hermione simply stared back at him, and he made a determined face.
Okay, to start, we need to raise ourselves just enough to free our arms. As soon as we brace ourselves with our hands, we stop chanting. Then we can rest and then go a bit more, he said, his eyes hopeful and desperate at once as he explained the plan.
Whenever you're ready, then, Hermione said anxiously, leaning her head towards his.
Draco did the same and pressed their cheeks together.
This will work, Granger, he tried to assure her. He closed his eyes.
It has to work.
Wingardium, then? Hermione asked softly.
Draco nodded against her without opening his eyes, and she closed her own.
On 3, she said, and he nodded again.
Hermione took a giant breath and then counted. When she reached 3, they both began to chant. They immediately felt the pull of the spell as it worked to try and lift them, but they went nowhere.
Damn it!
Draco cursed, and Hermione started to pull her head back. No, he shouted. We're trying again. He forced his head against hers and shouted the spell. Wingardium Leviosa! Wingardium Leviosa! Say it, damn it! Hermione cringed, but complied, and her voice joined his as they tried again. This time they started to slowly lift. Draco's chanting became frantic as he wiggled his right arm, and then the pressure of his body against it lessened. He yanked it free. Fuck! He screamed in agony as blood rushed into the limb. With the spell broken, they both dropped a few inches they'd risen, and then kept going.
Ah!
Hermione's frightened shrieks joined Draco's expletives as they slid further down into the crevice. Their feet kicked desperately at the walls until Hermione caught on an outcropping, jolting them harshly to a stop. Hermione trembled terribly as she tried to calm herself while Draco continued to swear.
Motherfucker!
He cried out, bowing his head in pain.
Holy fuck! Stop, Hermione practically begged. Calm down.
It hurts, he ground out. Merlin's fucking balls, it hurts.
What hurts?
She sniffed at her running nose from the involuntary tears the fall had brought on. Draco looked up, his face contorted. My arms, he said. He tried to lift his right one and then dropped it immediately as his eyes rolled back in pain.
It's been wedged behind you for 2 days, Hermione noted. It'll take a bit to feel normal again.
Fuck normal, he gasped out, looking down. I just want it not to feel like a chunk of burning lead. Hermione looked down at the arm that now hung limply beside her own left arm that had also come free. How is yours not hurting? He asked when he noticed her arm.
Mine wasn't caught in a way that restricted my blood flow, she explained. You're lucky the arm's not dead.
Draco flexed his right hand and winced. Hermione reached her free hand up and grabbed his arm. What are you doing? He asked fearfully.
Calm down, she said quietly,
as she began to gently massage his tingling limb.
You just need the blood to get flowing evenly again.
Draco shut his eyes and bit his lip as he let her squeeze and knead her hand up and down his arm until the painful prickling faded into a dull ache. He opened his eyes and looked at her repentantly, but she kept her eyes down at his arm. Thank you, he said when she finally released him and dropped her hand. She lifted her face and nodded lightly, but suddenly scowled in pain. What's wrong? Draco asked urgently. Hermione lifted her hand and reached behind her head.
My head slammed against the wall while we were falling, she said, cringing as she felt the back of her skull.
She brought her hand back out, and it was covered in blood. Shit, Draco said worriedly, noticing the blood that was now seeping down the sides of her neck to add bright red streaks to her mud-stained shirt. Let me see. She stretched her neck forward to rest her face on his shoulder, and he lifted his hand to her head.
He flexed his fingers several times, and then began parting her blood-soaked curls to try and see her wound. "Oh, gods," he whispered when he saw the deep gash down the back of her head. "Is it bad?" Hermione muffled into her shirt. He didn't answer as his fingers continued to paw her hair aside. "Malfoy?" His voice cracked. "Malfoy, how bad is it?" she demanded. Draco swallowed hard as he blinked at the wound. I think I can see the bone," he said shakily. "And it's, bleeding a lot." Hermione didn't say anything, and Draco shook himself against her gently. "Granger?" I'm okay," she said quietly. You're going to have to help me." "Yeah," Draco said, nodding. "Yeah, just tell me what to do, Granger. You gotta tell me what to do." "Grab as much of my hair as you can and press it into the wound," she directed calmly. "Oh, okay," he said anxiously. His eyes darted over her head as he tried to collect her wild curls into his fist. He pushed the handfuls against the gash. Like this?" he asked. "You have to press harder," she said. "Press as hard as you can and don't let up for 15 minutes. Do a count like you do when I sleep." Draco pressed his hand harder into her hair. "Harder," she said. "I don't want to hurt you more," he said warily. "It won't do any good if I pass out from blood loss, Malfoy. Press harder," she ordered, bringing her own hand up to push down over his. Draco also added pressure at her prompting and made guilty pout when she whimpered. "Gods, I'm sorry," he whispered. "I really thought it would work." "It's my fault," Hermione offered. "I should have realized it would be painful to free your arms." "Well, only one managed to." He trailed off as he finally looked over at his left arm. He gagged. "Malfoy?" Hermione asked, alarmed. "Malfoy, are you okay?" He shook his head as he gagged again, and tried to force back the bile working its way up his throat. "Why are you gagging?" she asked him when she heard him make the retching noise again. My arm. Oh, gods," he answered. Hermione's face screwed up with pain and concern as she felt Draco shaking while he continued to apply the hard pressure to the back of her scalp. "What about your arm?" It's wedged again, and..." He quickly turned his head and heaved again. "Don't vomit," Hermione warned him. "Don't look at it if it's bad. Focus on something else. Focus on the counting." Draco closed his eyes and took several calming breaths before beginning to count. 1, 2, 3. Hermione joined him in counting out loud. When they finally reached 900, Draco very carefully lifted his hand from the back of her head and poked between the curls to check her wound. "Well?" Hermione asked anxiously. "It looks like most of the bleeding has stopped," he said, grimacing slightly at her blood-matted hair. "It still looks nasty, though." Hermione very slowly lifted her head and gingerly placed her hand on the back of it to keep folding her sticky hair over the gash. "It feels nasty," she agreed with a pout. She glanced over at his left arm. "Oh, my God!" "Yeah," was all Draco managed to say in response as he chanced to look back at his arm. Hermione made a repulsed face as she studied his limb. His arm was caught in the same position as before, but turned at a slightly more severe angle, and the skin had split dramatically at his elbow from the force and friction of grinding against the rock during their fall. It was now actually bone on rock. "Malfoy," she breathed as she gaped at the exposed sinew and muscle, obviously unsure of how to comfort him. "Don't," he said, closing his eyes and resting his head back. Just help me keep my mind off of it so I don't pass out." "Right," she said, tearing her eyes away from the gore. This is the point where you say I told you so," he huffed. Hermione frowned slightly. "I'm not going to say that." Draco cracked an eye open at her. "Why not? You were right, as usual," he drawled reluctantly. "And now, because of me, we're 20 feet deeper and our fucking bones showing." "I don't want to row," Hermione nearly whispered. "And it wasn't your fault." Draco didn't respond, and the two fell into an uneasy silence until Hermione opened her mouth again. Do you want to try yelling now?" she asked, her hand still pressed hard at the back of her head. Draco looked despairingly up at the crevice's opening and shook his head. "There's no point, Granger. No one will hear us now," he said softly, with utter defeat in his voice. They stared at each other then, through the considerably dimmer light, reading the regret and repentance in the other's eyes until Draco looked away. "I'm sorry you got hurt," he said. Hermione watched him try to school away the pain present in his face, and then nudged his leg with hers. "Tell me about Quidditch," she said, when he looked up with a quizzical expression. He let out a small laugh. "You must have hit your head harder than we thought," he said. She smiled. "I'm trying to distract us from our injuries," she acknowledged. "Now, tell me about all of your best Seeker moments, unless you want me to start telling you about my views on house elves." Draco smirked at her, a genuine, pleased smirk. "Bossy," he said. Hermione merely smiled wider, and he began to talk.